Hi, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about Chapter 17, Mixed Methods Research. This is a design of much interest to many. So in Chapter 17, the authors go into depth and go into some details and specifics on how you can plan and interpret mixed methods research. So some of the key points overall is that it, of course, combines elements from both qualitative and quantitative methods to create a single design. It is based on the philosophical current of pragmatism. We'll talk a bit about that. And it requires integration across the different designs in both data collection, analysis, and interpretation. And one of the key points is also to think about the timing, how the data will be collected. So in terms of providing a rationale for why mixed research, here are some of the reasons why mixed research might be a good fit for a particular research question or study. So it could provide a more comprehensive understanding of the research phenomenon, particularly if it is a more complex issue that needs to have more data and more different types of data. So another example or reason is triangulation. So this comes from what we read about in qualitative research as a method to establish validity. Triangulation is inherently embedded in the design of mixed methods research because you are definitely going to be using different types of data to help validate your findings. And similarly, it is going to draw from multiple perspectives, not from multiple participants, but from both statistical trends and then also lived experiences through the qualitative research. And so an underlying principle of mixed methods research is combining the strengths and having complementary strengths and to try to counteract weaknesses of each design. So let's go ahead and review the strengths and weaknesses of both quantitative and qualitative and think about how those can fit together into crafting a really strong mixed methods design. So some of the strengths of quantitative design are that it provides the ability to test hypotheses and provide evidence to support hypotheses and relationships between variables. It is possible to establish evidence of cause and effect relationships or correlational relationships. You're able to generalize the results from your sample to the larger population, and you can repeat it. It can be replicable. Now, there are some limitations, of course. You have to always contend with any other factors or extraneous variables. And it can be more challenging if you are exploring a new phenomenon because you're expected to have a hypothesis. And since it is more controlled, it might not fully capture what is really happening in the real world and some of those nuances and contextual factors that are so important in understanding what is happening. And even though it can establish evidence of a particular hypothesis, it might not apply to a specific or local situation in practice. Now, on the other hand, qualitative data can provide rich and detailed insights and evidence of individual lived experiences. And it captures it could be the essence if it's a phenomenology, but the subjective meanings and perspectives that people assign to the experiences that we go to. Another benefit is that it is conducted in a natural setting. And so that bolsters the likelihood that it actually corresponds to what's happening in practice. And it allows for a more emergent design, flexibility, more exploratory to explore perhaps phenomena that are not yet well understood. However, limitations, it is not generalizable in the sense that quantitative research can be very time consuming. And it is always mediated by the researcher's point of view because they are collecting, interpreting, and driving the direction of the research. And it is not what is best for testing hypotheses. So please put in the comments, what do you think are some of the most salient strengths and limitations of both designs when you are thinking about going about choosing them, and especially if you are thinking about mixed methods research. So, putting all that all together, some of the strengths of mixed research are you can have a rich analysis that both combines numbers through the statistical analysis and narratives to further contextualize. And that goes with the other strength of validation. Using both different methods, you're able to have a stronger validation of your findings. Could be generalizable, and it could offer a path to make qualitative findings generalizable. It's really useful for complex research questions that need a more comprehensive design to fully address all of the aspects of that research question. And it can help link theory to practice since it is well suited for more complex research questions. Now, in the chapter, you're going to read that the philosophical foundation of many mixed research designs is pragmatism. And so this goes back to some of our earlier readings when we read about the sources of knowledge in the beginning of the book, and then also some of the different theories and philosophies that are used by different types of researchers. So we have positivism that is used in quantitative research, or empiricism that is that reality exists and researchers are able to derive the truth through a controlled set of metrics. And then last week we read about post-structuralism, postmodernism, and there are other paradigms as well, constructivism, critical methods that are well suited for qualitative research that understand knowledge as being socially constructed. And so pragmatism lies in the middle. So this is one of the critiques of mixed methods research, is that they are incompatible because the philosophical underpinnings about the source of knowledge and how knowledge is produced are incompatible. However, advocates of mixed methods argue that they can be compatible, and oftentimes pragmatism is the way that they go about doing that. So instead of being focused on the philosophical underpinnings and groundings in the theory that is being used to legitimize the methods that they're using, they're focused on the practical solutions and having design that will help them get there. And instead of having what I mentioned before about the incompatible nature of different theories of knowledge and different theories of how knowledge is produced, it rejects those dualisms of subjective versus objective, or empirical versus a more theoretical, qualitative versus quantitative. It rejects those dualisms and sees it as multifaceted, a more pluralist conception. It's again kind of like focused on practical solutions, on workable solutions, a more pluralist point of view, and really leans into the flexibility that is offered. Now, in the text, we even learned that mixed methods can be used as a means to bolster the causal evidence in experimental research. And so the authors gave several different examples on how qualitative research can be added to experimental design to provide evidence to identify maybe the contextual factors that are happening, understand participants' responses and experiences, and then understand the real world impact, or maybe identify any other variables that might be impeding the results. So this is the research continuum. So when we think about mixed research, there is a degree to which how mixed is it? So this is what the research continuum is referring to. So monomethod means that it is not mixed at all. It is entirely quantitative or entirely qualitative. Then we have partially mixed, meaning that there's a minimal use of one other design. So you might be doing survey research with using a closed-ended survey. So participants are indicating on perhaps a Likert scale their response to a series of questions. And there might be two questions at the end that are open-ended. So that would be partially mixed because it is primarily quantitative. However, there is some qualitative data being collected. And then we have fully mixed, which has a strong integration of both methods in all phases of the research design. So if it's a strongly mixed study, you are going to have, starting at the bottom, the data collection methods are going to be mixed. So for instance, you might have interviews and you might have tests that you are testing with a hypothesis. Your analytic procedures, you are going to use both your qualitative methods, your quantitative methods, and then also integrating them together, a combined analysis, and you're interpreting the results in both paradigms. Both in paradigm is referring to quantitative and qualitative. And so a strongly mixed study, it's integrated at multiple levels of the design and even in the research questions everywhere. Now, minimum standard for having mixed research is that the data analysis must be integrated. And so this is something that we will read more about in a later chapter, but there are special techniques and methods that researchers use to integrate the data, the quantitative data with the qualitative data. And also in the interpretation phase, you need to integrate both types of data there. Okay, so when thinking about interpreting and planning mixed methods designs, there's two main considerations. The first is the paradigm emphasis. Is it equal weight between the qualitative and the quantitative, or is there one paradigm that's being emphasized more, a primary weight? And then the time orientation. Are the data going to be collected together? And by data, I mean the qualitative and the quantitative, or are they going to be collected sequentially? And even more specific, sometimes if it is a sequential design, sometimes the participants are different. So that's important to think about too. Will it be the same participants, different participants? How will they be sampled? So here is the table from the text to show some of the different types of design and also the notation. So here we have the paradigm emphasis. We have equal emphasis, which is indicated by the plus sign. Well, equal emphasis is indicated by the capital letters. So here you can see that the qual and quant are both in capital letters, which tells you that it is equal emphasis. And same over here, the qual, quant, qual, they are all in capital letters. That indicates equal emphasis. And then if it is a primary focus, that paradigm is in capital and then the secondary is in lowercase. So this one is primarily qualitative and then supported by quantitative data. So when you look at emphasis, look at uppercase versus lowercase letters. Now the plus sign and the arrow has to do with the time order. So the plus means that the data are collected together around the same time. So this would mean more than likely it's going to be the same participants, and perhaps it's one measure where they are collected, or perhaps the test is given and then the following week an interview is conducted. Now, sequential, you can see the arrow, and so whatever's first is conducted first, and that means that the second part of the data is collected a significant amount of time later, like months later. It could be different participants, but it is not in the same setting or the same block. So here are some of the most popular mixed methods research designs, and it's really important that the design matches the research question and the purpose of the question. So there's many different ways to do this, and it's important to construct it again to reflect your research question. So here you can see this is equal weight and this is concurrent. So it could be called concurrent or convergent or parallel. And then here you can see this is also equal weight. However, the qualitative data is collected first and then the quantitative. So this is called sequential exploratory. So the exploratory is because the first round, the first significant time period is going to be focused on the qualitative data. Maybe it's participant observation. Maybe the researcher is going to go into a school for 6 months and do participant observation. And then after that, perhaps they have a theory that comes out of that, and they might test it with quantitative data. So then on the other hand, this is also equal weight, but we have the quantitative first and then the qual. This is sequential explanatory. So the first set of data is collected through quantitative means. Maybe they are test scores, maybe they are the results from a semester. And so that is the first part that's collected. And then after that is analyzed, you will have the qualitative to explain. And the time order, concurrent versus sequential, can also relate to when the data are collected. So in concurrent, the data would be collected in about the same time and then analyzed at about the same time. In sequential, whatever is first would be collected first, analyzed, and then that would inform the second part of data collection. So when you are proposing this, make sure to say what the weight is. Are they equal weight? What is the primary weight? And will the data be collected together? Will one be collected and analyzed first? And will that inform the other, or vice versa? Okay, so here is the research wheel in terms of how you go about designing your study. And as you can see, the research questions lie here in the middle because they are informing every aspect of it. And so even though it is a cycle, you can still enter and sort of go between these different elements as they are all mutually informative. So we're going to talk about a few considerations for each of these. So first, is mixed research appropriate? So you need to think about your research purpose and questions and make sure that they are aligned with mixed research. And that is if there's multiple objectives. So one of the objectives might be to test a hypothesis, and the other might be to understand a lived experience. So when providing those rationales, here are 5 different ways that you can give a rationale for why mixed research. We talked about triangulation. This can corroborate findings. It could be complementary to provide clarity and enhance one set of data, develop to inform one method from the other. So that would obviously be a sequential initiation to discover contradictions that might exist between the two different types of data, and then expansion, extend the scope. So when you are going about, you've decided that mixed research is appropriate, you've given a rationale, now it's time to propose your design. So choose first time, or I would choose emphasis first. Is it going to be equal emphasis, or is there going to be a primary emphasis? And then after that, the time. Will the data be collected and analyzed concurrently, or will they be collected, the first type be collected and analyzed, and then the second? You have your notation here with your capital letters, your arrows, your plus. And then really important, you need to think about how you will sample for each type of data. Is it the same participants? Is it different participants? So here you can see in this example, random sampling for obviously the quantitative data, and then purposeful sampling for the qualitative data. And it's possible too that you only sample a portion of the participants. So maybe you have you use data from an entire school for their test scores at the end of the year. So that might be 600 participants. And then maybe you use purposeful sampling to interview the students who scored in the 99th percentile if you're interested in something. So sometimes the qualitative sample is much smaller than the quantitative sample. So that's something to think about too if you're proposing this type in your research proposal. What method will you use for the quantitative portion? What will you use for the qualitative portion? And about how many participants do you hope to enroll? And then data collection and analysis. So data collection, it could be the same sample or different sample. As I mentioned, it could be the same time or different times. And it could be the same when in thinking about the methods, we learned that almost all of the methods can be used in a quantitative way and a qualitative way. So it might be possible to mix them. Like it is possible to do an observation. It would be hard for one person to do it, but it is possible to do an open-ended observation and then a structured observation. So that is possible as well. And then what are your different analytic methods? And we will come back to analysis in further chapters. But what is your quantitative analysis methods, your qualitative analysis methods, and then your integration. So a method that is very common in mixed research is data conversion, and that is converting one type of data to another. Quantitizing is converting qualitative data to quantitative data, so words to numbers, and qualitizing is converting quantitative data to qualitative data, so numbers to narratives. And then, as with any type of research, it's important to establish evidence of validity. So validating that the findings have validity, reliability, if you're using a test where that might come up. So we read about this in chapter 11. So go back to look at the methods of legitimation for those multiple validities, but some of them, etic, integration, causation that you can find there. And then it's important in mixed research that the interpretation begins early. So looking for convergences between the types of data, contradictions, and expansion to look for meta inferences across the two different types of data. And then when writing, it's important to include both types of the both elements of the design, both the qualitative and quantitative. So there are some tips in the book about that. Now, when thinking about some of the limitations of mixed methods research, you do have to have a level of expertise in both types of design in order to be able to effectively propose it and carry it out. Can be research and resource intensive, both time consuming, also financial. I talked about this in the beginning of the lecture, but the paradigm conflicts in terms of the philosophical underpinnings could pose an issue. And since it is complex and useful for addressing complex questions, which is an advantage, that can also create a challenge because it can be quite complex to try to interpret the data together or across in a way that is meaningful. And then it is possible that you will have contradictory findings, meaning you have one finding with your quantitative data through your hypothesis testing, your statistics, and a contradictory finding when after you've analyzed the qualitative data. So you might see this as a benefit because it reveals that there's something else happening in this phenomenon that is leading to this effect. So those tensions can be helpful, but it requires additional efforts to really contextualize the contradiction, interpret it, and explain. So here is an example of mixed methods research. So here I want you to think about the research question, why the research question might be well suited for mixed methods, and what you hear in here in terms of the different types of data collection. What were the qualitative data sources you hear? What were the quantitative data sources you hear? And any other connections you hear in this example to research design.
Adolescents face many, many different kinds of challenges. There's trauma, there's basic needs, there's academic challenges, there's instability in home lives and neighborhood circumstances. But a strong, trusting relationship with an adult, it's not a panacea, but it's a foundation.
We We are trying to understand what happens when children try to go back to school. So they've been in the juvenile justice system. They're trying to return to a traditional school. We were trying to think as social psychologists about ways to intervene so that more students can complete the high school diploma.
We elevated kids' voices. We asked them about their goals and values, who they are as a person, and what they would want an adult in school to know about them. We asked kids to nominate who might be an adult in school who could make a difference for them, and then we shared that information with that educator. We were trying to orient the child towards a positive relationship with that person, and that adult towards a positive relationship with that kid.
A lot of that has to do with building positive adult relationships where students feel protected, listened to, cared for, and heard. And so all that feeds into a sense of belongingness and feeling like this is where I can be successful. Someone here cares for me, someone here is guiding me, someone here is concerned about my success.
What you're trying to do is help teachers to see a student and not just a kid who is justice involved. We're not trying to reduce bias. We're trying to sort of think about the ways in which bias might operate and then making bias less likely, taking it offline, so to speak.
It's focused on building a relationship between the person responsible for the academic learning and the learner. While educators have worked in a system that has failed youth, that has failed them, and sometimes seen in our society as a failing system, nobody signs up every day to go to work and fail. And so sometimes you actually inspire and motivate adults to bring their best self to the success of one student.
In the control condition, 69% of youth recidivated within that period by the end of the next full academic semester, and that is a tragic and sobering statistic. In the treatment condition, where the letter went to the adult, and we tried to reorient the adult to see this person as a child, not a criminal, then the number was just 29%. It was a 40 percentage point reduction.
We are really eager to try to understand the boundaries of this. What can we do to actually improve it and to expand it so children can have a better transition and ultimately to have a better life.
Okay, I look forward to hearing your insights about this example and any of your other connections or questions about mixed research.